This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Italy's Prime Minister meets struggling UN-backed Libya Prime Minister in Rome. Sixth post-apartheid poll set to open on Wednesday in South Africa. And UN Secretary General says over 1 million species at risk of extinction because of human action. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome. I am Peninah Karibe. Also in studio with the highlights of today's business news is Rama.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. MTN Nigeria has filed an application to list on the country's stock market. And South Africa's business confidence levels have gone up, supported in part by rising import volumes. We'll have the details and data of those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. Libya's struggling Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj met the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte on Tuesday morning in an effort to drum up support in Europe for his UN-backed government. The government of national unity has been under attack since early April from forces under General Khalifa Haftar. Haftar's forces are advancing towards Tripoli in a battle which erupted in early April, threatening to ignite a civil war on the scale of the 2011 uprising. According to the UN Health Agency, the fighting has killed at least 432 people so far, with an additional 2,069 people wounded. The push was launched by the self-styled Libyan National Army based in the country's east, which is seeking to take over the city and defeat militias loosely allied to a UN-supported government in Tripoli. The fighting has also displaced more than 50,000 people. Yasser Hakim has been keenly following those developments. He joins us live from Cairo. Yasser, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte met with Libyan Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj. What was discussed at that meeting?
Yes, Peninah, the Fayez Sarraj was trying to, calling for Italy to help him in supporting his stance in the war in Libya. Italy is a supporter of Fayez Sarraj and the unity government, as well as trying to convince Italy to also work with other European countries to stop the war and to support the Fayez Sarraj government. At the same time, the Italian Prime Minister said that he is going to meet with Khalifa Haftar very soon. He did not specify timing, but he said that he will meet with Khalifa Haftar soon, and that Italy is trying to reach a ceasefire, to create a ceasefire, and to reach some kind of a political solution rather than military solution to the crisis in Libya with new elections and new constitution. So those were the statements that came out of the meeting today between Fayez Sarraj and the Italian Prime Minister Conte.
And Yasser, the Libyan Prime Minister is on a European tour. What exactly is he looking for, and will he get it? Yes,
what he's found out after the war started by Khalifa Haftar into Tripoli is that some of the European countries have changed their stance. And before, there was an international recognition of the Fayez Sarraj government or the Libyan unity government. But right now, some of these powers have been changing their stance or taking a more balanced stand with Haftar as well, such as Germany and France. And those are two other countries that Fayez Sarraj will be visiting during his tour to try to convince them to change their stance. As he said, there are countries that are hesitant, and that he wants to make them support his political framework and to stop the war. Obviously, what Khalifa Haftar is saying is that he is fighting a war against terrorism and to unite the country using a Libyan national army, while Fayez Sarraj says this is leading to a civil war, and that attacking the capital Tripoli will obviously create chaos in Libya, and that's why he is trying to lobby his stance with the European powers in the trip here in Europe.
And finally, Yasser, there are reports that Eastern Libyan commander Haftar's forces shot down a Tripoli government warplane. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, it was a warplane, and the pilot was arrested, and he turned out to be a Portuguese pilot. The Haftar government says that this pilot does not represent Portugal, but he is a mercenary that has been bought by the National Unity Government or Fayez Sarraj government, and that he is now under investigation and will be tried according to international law and human rights law. The Haftar also said that in statements by the pilot, he said that he was told to, or his mission was to destroy roads and bridges to stop the Libyan National Army from entering the capital Tripoli. The National Libyan Army has also said that they have detected 9 other foreigners who have been trying to enter the country or have entered the country. They are pilots and as well as Air Force engineers brought by the Fayez Sarraj government, and that they're also part of a group of mercenaries that are used by the Fayez Sarraj government to fight in the war in Libya, and that they have entered through Masrata and through the Tripoli airport coming from Istanbul. Those are the remarks and information coming up from the National Libyan Army. And this situation is actually going to help the National Libyan Army, because they have been saying before that this war is against terrorism, against extremists and militias and mercenaries, and arresting a Portuguese pilot who's not Libyan fighting for the other side is a sort of, for them, they will try to use it media-wise and propaganda-wise to prove that they were correct when saying that they are fighting the terrorist extremists and non-Libyans militias that are inside Libya. So this could be a change in stance by foreign countries, for example, when they see such a situation. And especially that US President Donald Trump has also changed his stance and has talked to Khalifa Haftar by phone, showing that he's also now supporting the Libyan National Army. Back to you, Peninah.
All right, Yasser, thank you very much for that update. Yasser Hakim, live for us there in Cairo. Now, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres and African Union Commission Chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat convened the 3rd African Union United Nations Annual Conference at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The conference was focused on building on the close partnership between the two organizations and addressed, among other issues, climate change and the impact of insecurity and conflict in Africa.
2019 is the year of refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons. The AU theme for this year will direct the body's efforts towards durable solutions to forced displacements in Africa. During the meeting, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, told the press that the partnership between the African Union and the United Nations is an absolutely central strategic partnership for the global body and its work worldwide.
The partnership between the African Union and the UN is an absolutely central strategic partnership for the United Nations. We consider that our work in peace and security, in human rights, in development, in relation to climate change, our work can only succeed in the world if it succeeds in Africa. And we believe that our work can only succeed in Africa if we work hand in hand together with the African Union.
The AU Commission chairperson highlighted the link between the rising numbers of militant groups and climate change.
The fact that the young are attracted by the extremist movements is directly connected to the climate change.
It's a very serious situation that has a negative impact on the security and on the development of the continent. Something needs to be done about it, and it needs to be done now.
My position is very clear. It's an appeal to a ceasefire, which means cessation of hostilities, which means no more offensive. That is very clear.
When asked about Libya, the two principals agreed that the ceasefire is paramount.
We are convinced that there is no military solution to this kind of conflict. The Libyan parties need to absolutely agree to a ceasefire and to agree to meet at a table and find a peaceful and political solution to the crisis.
At the conference, Guterres and Faki discussed the overall progress on implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063 in Africa.
Development in Africa is a fundamental precondition for more equilibrium, more peace in the world, for phenomena like migration to be more easily handled. And so it is the interest of the whole international community to substantially increase the financing for development available for African countries.
They urged further efforts to harness both private and public finance to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063 towards low-carbon and climate-resilient pathways.
It is absolutely essential for states, for the business community, for cities, for all to assume the engagement to reduce emissions by 45% to 2030 and to come to a net zero emissions in 2050. Without that, the African continent will inevitably have dramatic impacts that will undermine its development and undermine its security, and the old world will suffer.
The conference championed the need to ensure investment for development of a robust data ecosystem at the country and regional levels to enable evidence-based policymaking. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
South Africans go to the polls on Wednesday. It is the 6th election since the end of the apartheid rule. Most parties are promising to create jobs, fight crime and poverty, crack down on corruption and make more land and homes available for the masses once elected. As CGTN's Renee Delcam reports, the gloves are off as the masses have their say at the ballot.
A new political poll shows that the ruling African National Congress will win the national election with about 61% of the vote, while arch political rivals, the ANC and the DA, are neck and neck in the battle for the Western Cape.
I know that we are all going to vote so that the ANC can retain power at the national level and take power here in the Western Cape. And many of us around the country are filled with a lot of hope, as well as a lot of confidence that the African National Congress is going to emerge victorious.
Fellow South Africans, this is a choice about tomorrow. This election is a choice between jobs or corruption. The evidence is there. You want jobs, you vote DA. You want corruption, you vote for the others. It's as straightforward as that. Because as we stand here today, this is about a future. And I really wake up to a dream that says, one day we will put a job in every home.
Right now, the political battle for the Western Cape is so intense and the rivalry between the ANC and the DA so great that the DA has called on voters not to waste their votes on the smaller opposition parties. The DA, which governs the Western Cape, is desperate to keep the province out of ANC and EFF hands. But the EFF believes it has a good chance of winning the hearts, minds and votes of the people of the Western Cape.
Amandla! Fighters, we are here to take over what belongs to us. This government of Western Cape belongs to the EFF, belongs to the people of
Western Cape, you are not foreigners in the Cape Town. You are not foreigners in Western Cape. This is your home. This is your land. You must claim this land.
Renadal Calm, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And for more on this election, we are joined live from the coastal city of Durban by CGTN's Robert Nagila. Robert, special voting in South Africa has concluded. What is expected next?
That's absolutely correct. That process, which took place over the last 48 hours, has now concluded. Going by the Electoral Commission, an estimated 770,000 South Africans had registered to take part in that particular process. Now that's done. On Wednesday at 7 a.m., an estimated 23,000 polling stations will open their doors to potentially 26 million registered voters. It remains to be seen just how much of that number will turn up to vote. That process will take place throughout the entire day up until 9 p.m. to allow for those who are working to also exercise their democratic right. Immediately after the polling stations shut their doors at 9 p.m., counting of the votes will then commence. According to the Electoral Commission, 4 days from now, 4 days from today, we should expect to have provincial results of the winner from the presidential race. Peninah?
And Robert, what has the government and the IEC done to ensure tomorrow's vote is free, it's fair and incident-free?
Well, authorities here in South Africa say that they are as ready and prepared as they will ever be to conduct this poll. Now, about 60 million ballot papers have been printed. The Electoral Commission says that come 7 o'clock Wednesday morning, all electoral material will be at the designated polling stations. That includes electoral staff as well. So they expect that process to carry on smoothly, barring some small challenges here and there. When it comes to security, there's going to be a very heavy and visible security presence throughout the entire country, and a police presence at each and every one of the 23 estimated polling stations on Wednesday when the polling stations begin conducting the electoral process. Now, in the lead up to this particular poll, South Africa's police minister had met with police chiefs around the entire country and some leaders to oversee this massive operation throughout the entire country. Two particular provinces, that is KwaZulu-Natal, where I am at the moment, and the Northwest Province, were earmarked by police as potential trouble spots. Now, KwaZulu-Natal, for the simple reason that you've got some local authority workers that have been on strike for some time, and they are threatening to disrupt that process. We saw a little bit of that during the special voting, where some roads were blocked and they threatened to burn some of the electoral material, but police moved in very fast, cleared out those roads, and people went on with that process. So the Electoral Commission appealing to political parties to speak to their supporters to ensure that the process runs as smooth as possible. In terms of numbers here in KwaZulu-Natal, we're expecting about 27,000 police officers to be deployed, another 50,000 at the polling stations, giving you an idea of just how big and massive this operation will be. The military is on high alert, but the police are stressing that they will act as backup when needed, if needed, but the police will lead any operation on the ground. Peninah.
All right, Robert, we appreciate that update. Thank you. Robert Nagila live for us there in South Africa. Meanwhile, victims in Mozambique are calling for more help in the aftermath of Cyclone Kenneth in the country's northern coastal region of Pemba. 38 people have so far been confirmed dead, according to the country's National Institute of Disaster Management. More than 20,000 others are reportedly without proper shelter. Many of the roads in the area as well Many of the roads as well in the area, as well as critical infrastructure, were severely damaged, with flights to the region grounded. Relief agencies say they have lost contact with some communities as a result of challenges with transportation in remote areas.
The floodwater came and filled my entire house, and now we're trying to fix the damage, but it will take time because we don't have much as a family.
I have nothing much left. The cyclone destroyed everything, and with 7 children, life is simply a daily struggle. If anyone can help, I will be grateful.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Straight ahead. The UN Secretary General says over 1 million species at risk of extinction because of human action. And the EU commits over $150 million to combat piracy and kidnappings in West Africa.
Data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that climate change will have a catastrophic effect on the world if leaders do not take action. Guterres has stressed that Africa will be hit particularly hard despite the continent's relatively low carbon emissions output. The UN chief, who was speaking in New York, said that it is not too late to act. A United Nations report released on Monday showed how people are putting nature in more trouble now than at any other time in human history, with extinction looming of over 1 million species of plants and animals. The findings are not just about saving plants and animals, but about preserving a world that's becoming harder for humans to live in, according to the scientist who headed that report. Food and water insecurity, flooding, and other natural disasters could result from climate change if people do not take action.
Climate change is the defining issue of our time. The African continent practically does not contribute to climate change, but the African continent is one of the areas of the world where the impact of climate change is more dramatic and devastating. Look at the storms in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, or look at the drought progressing dramatically in areas like the Sahel.
Africa is home to different varieties and species of wildlife and plants. Sadly, the UN report does not exempt the continent from threats posed by human activity. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa takes a look at some of the animals and plants that are threatened.
In 2018, the world's last male northern white rhino died in Kenya at the age of 45. The death of Sudan awakened the world to the reality of species tottering on the brink of extinction due to human activity. Apart from the black rhino, the white rhino is also on the decline. There were about 850,000 rhinos in the last century, but demand for rhino horn has reduced the number to about 5,000. Another species in the Big Five that is also threatened is the African elephant. In 1930, between 5 and 10 million elephants roamed Africa's savanna. Now just 415,000 remain on the continent. Botswana is currently home to the largest number of elephants on Earth. The southern African nation has around 130,000 elephants. The pangolin is another animal that has been greatly poached, almost to extinction. This beautiful animal curls itself into a ball as a defense mechanism. Perhaps this is the reason why human beings have turned it into the most trafficked animal on the continent. The king of the jungle, the lion, is also not safe. While its kingdom continues to shrink every year owing to a loss of habitat, human-wildlife conflicts have seen many lions killed in revenge attacks. When it comes to plants, the distinctive baobab tree, famous for covering much of Madagascar, is increasingly threatened. The carnivorous Venus flytrap may be famous, but it's also not safe. But the most shocking part is the threat on the African donkey. It is considered the beast of burden. The extinction of the African donkey could threaten many livelihoods on the continent. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
The European Union is committing more than $150 million to the West African regional body ECOWAS to combat maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea. Head of the EU delegation to Nigeria, Kat Cornelis, announced the renewed funding and a maritime security summit in Abuja. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports from there.
A critical brainstorming session targeted at combating piracy and kidnappings in the Gulf of Guinea. Representatives from the West African Economic Bloc and international community want an end to insecurity in the waterways so crucial to trade between West Africa and the rest of the world. Yet, unending piracy and kidnappings have propelled the Gulf of Guinea to international notoriety.
In 2018, the region remained the most dangerous in the world for piracy and armed robbery at sea. This jeopardizes critical maritime routes for trade and business, but also affects human security, governance, and environment.
The Gulf of Guinea has recorded over 200 incidences of piracy and robbery, 6 cases of ship hijack, 130 persons have been taken hostage, and over 70 seafarers kidnapped for ransom. That accounts for about 80% of incidences in the world. Every year, $2 billion is lost in the region as a result of maritime insecurity, and international trade is left in jeopardy. It's a menace that has pulled together the ECOWAS and the EU, and they want to find a lasting solution.
The EU action in the Gulf of Guinea aims at reinforcing the security development nexus through programs that address multidimensional threats such as piracy, armed robbery at sea, transnational organized crime, and illegal fishing, and support economic development opportunities of coastal communities while protecting and valuing environmental resources.
The EU funding will support the West African Integrated Maritime Security to patrol the waterways in the Gulf of Guinea and go after criminals in the region. Part of the funding will also help uncontrolled fishing in international waters off the West African coast. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
An extraordinary gathering of the Council of Ministers of the East African Regional Body known as IGAD is taking place in South Sudan's capital, Juba. The meeting is expected to discuss the country's peace process. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The meeting is expected to assess the implementation of the peace deal. The peace agreement had stipulated that a unity government should be formed by the 12th of this month, but parties to the deal decided last week to delay formation of the new government by 6 more months. That decision will now be presented before the Council of Ministers for their consideration. The peace process was mediated by the East African Regional Body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD. The regional body is also overseeing its implementation. Residents of South Sudan's capital, Juba, have been reacting to the news of the delay in the formation of a unity government.
If the government is telling us that it's going to form in 6 months, then by 6 months at least we should be seeing results. They shouldn't keep postponing the formation of the new government, regardless of whether the security aspect or whatever that they have going on. They should merge everything.
I really urge that they should fasten up the process for all of us, so that at the end of the day we will celebrate as one family, together living in harmony, love, and in peace. Because if the 6 months really, I think that is too much for me.
The meeting here will also try to come up with a realistic timetable for implementation of the peace agreement, especially the security sector reforms, because the extension of the formation of a new government by 6 more months came as a result of lack of progress in that area. The peace deal also dictates that President Salva Kiir's government provides some money for its implementation, but parties to the agreement say very little money is being provided by the government. South Sudan's government says it has limited funds and is urging the international community to financially support the peace process. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Time now to catch up with the day's business news, and for that we cross over to Rama.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up in business. MTN Nigeria has filed an application to list on the Nigerian bourse. And business confidence in South Africa has risen. We'll explore why when we come back.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In the telecommunications sector, MTN Nigeria has filed an application to list on the country's stock market. Now, the company has applied to list by introduction. What that basically means is that it will not be raising any new capital with this listing or issuing any new shares. Existing shareholders, however, will have the ability to sell their shares on the open market upon listing, exiting if they wish to. The listing is part of a 2015 settlement agreed to after the telco incurred a record $5.2 billion fine of its failure to disconnect subscribers whose SIM cards were not registered as required by law. MTN's troubles in Nigeria did not stop there, however. Last year, it paid $53 million to settle accusations of illegally moving $8.1 billion from the country through dividend payments. It is also still facing a $2 billion tax claim from the federal government. MTN's listing is expected to happen somewhere before the end of June. Now, speaking of that particular tax claim, a court in Nigeria has dismissed a preliminary objection that had been filed by the country's Attorney General seeking to strike out a suit instituted by MTN. The court ruled that the telco giant did meet the deadline to respond to the $2 billion tax demand from the country's AG. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
The Attorney General had asked the court to dismiss MTN's lawsuit because, according to him, the suit was statute barred, meaning it was filed 3 months after MTN received the initial request for a self-assessment. But ruling on the matter, the judge held that MTN actually met the 3-month deadline. He thereafter dismissed the Attorney General's preliminary objection seeking to challenge the suit. The case has now been adjourned to June the 26th, 2019 for further hearing. Now, apart from challenging the powers of the Office of the Attorney General to levy and collect customs duties, value-added tax and withholding tax, MTN is claiming a total sum of $8.3 million in damages against the Attorney General. The mobile telecoms firm has also said even if the court eventually ruled that it is legal for the Attorney General to assess taxes and customs duties, the assessment that has been made is not legitimate, insisting that the firm has always complied with Nigeria's tax laws. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And we're still in Nigeria. A Dutch court has ruled in favor of 4 Nigerian women who had sued the oil giant Royal Dutch Shell over its alleged role in the unlawful arrest, detention and eventual execution of their husbands by the Nigerian military in 1995. The oil major denies those accusations. It argues, in fact, that the court lacked the jurisdiction to hear the case, but the oil firm was ordered to hand over confidential internal documents to the plaintiff's lawyers. CGTN's Phil Ihaza has more on this story from Nigeria's capital.
The 4 Nigerian widows Esther Kiobel, Victoria Bera, Blessing Iwo and Charity Levula are suing All Giant Shell over allegations of conspiracy in a brutal crackdown on protesters against Shell's devastating pollution of the Ogoni community, south-south region of Nigeria. The widows' husbands were among 9 others, popularly called the Ogoni 9, that led a movement for survival of Ogoni people, MOSOP, campaigning for greater control of oil and gas resources on their land and protesting against oil pollution by major oil companies like Shell. However, after 4 prominent Ogoni leaders were killed by a mob allegedly linked to MOSOP, Ken Sarawiwa, the then president of MOSOP, and the 8 others were accused of complicity in the murders. They were hastily tried by a military tribunal in 1995 under Nigeria's late military dictator Sani Abacha, found guilty and executed. The case was first filed by the widows in New York in 2002, but in 2013 the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the U.S. did not have jurisdiction to hear the case. Experts say it's a welcome development for the International Court of Justice in The Hague to give fair hearing to these women.
The rights of individuals are becoming increasingly held by that court. So it's a good development. We can no longer use our local arguments that, you don't have jurisdiction, you don't have local standard to approach the court. That has been defeated. And the good part of it for our own legal system here in Nigeria is that our courts can now sit back and look at this phenomenal development in the jurisprudence of the world. I think it narrows down to this issue that the world has become a global entity.
Shell started operations in Ogoni land in 1958, and by 1992, oil production in the small community had jumped to 28,000 barrels per day, which is about 3% of its approximately 1 billion barrels per day total production in Nigeria. But the oil giant has produced no oil or gas from Ogoni land since 1993, although the community still serves as a transit route for its pipelines transporting oil production from other areas. Critics have accused the oil giant for large amounts of oil spills across the country within the past 50 years of its exploration. The Shell Group denies all allegations and maintains that its appeals for the then military government to spare the lives of the protesters fell on deaf ears.
The case is two-sided. There is the criminal aspect, there is the civil aspect. Now, this woman's agitation is not premised around the criminal allegation. It is more of the civil case. It might be legitimate under whatever law that Shell is discharged of any criminal liability. But once this court finds at the end of the case that they are responsible for the conduct, then they must be bound to pay whatever compensation the court will impose.
The widows want Shell to tender an apology publicly and compensate them for the financial and emotional suffering caused by the husband's death. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Also on the continent, a survey has shown that South Africa's business confidence levels did go up in the month of April as retail sales and import volumes improved alongside a slightly firmer currency. Among other factors, those did lift sentiment from a 7-month low as businesses indicated that they expected a stable post-election policy environment. The South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry's monthly business confidence index went up to 93.7 in April from 91.8 in March. The reading is the highest since January, and it had also been soothed by the increased focus on the economy in the run-up to general elections that will be held on the 8th of May. Still in South Africa, the authorities over there have launched an ambitious plan to unlock the value in its waters through commercial aquaculture. To that end, the authorities will introduce a number of measures designed to attract a lot more investment. Authorities in Pretoria argue that South Africa's aquaculture sector could grow into a $242 billion industry by 2022. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with the details.
For many coastal fishing communities, harvesting wild fish stocks along South Africa's coastline has become a tedious exercise. That's because nets are just not hauling in what they used to. South Africa's Fisheries Department believes it has a solution through Operation Pakisa.
There are several support programs that we are putting in place to encourage investors to join our sector. Those programs include revising the legislation to make sure that when an investor comes into a sector, the legislation is enabling for the investor.
Saldanha Bay in the Western Cape has already shown a sustainable model in shellfish aquaculture for the oyster and mussel fisheries. the government will further boost this sector with its own Saldanha Bay Aquaculture Development Zone.
Those zones makes it easier for investors to come in the sector in a sense that we have dealt with authorizations, we have ensured access to relevant resources such as seawater when it's sea-based, access to land has been dealt with.
The zone could create more than 2,500 jobs with an initial turnover of more than $60 million a year. While it may seem encouraging, especially for the surrounding coastal fishing communities, some concerns do exist. There is broad consensus amongst experts that it is unsustainable to continue targeting wild stocks along the coastline, but creating aquaculture infrastructure along the coastline can also be prohibitively expensive.
The problem with the aquaculture or mariculture as it is called here in South Africa is that it's capital intensive, and most small communities cannot really afford to go into that. That's why there's insistence that the way to go is to leave some of the capture fish resources for their use rather than looking at options such as aquaculture. Of course, where possible, that is an option in terms of depleting or resources that are being depleted.
But the groundwork for a sustainable aquaculture sector capable of tapping into the global $242 billion industry has already kicked off. South Africa hopes to become Africa's leading aquaculture destination for the many years to come. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
One last story for you. Law enforcement agencies, aviation regulators, even passengers like you and I, were all increasingly concerned about the risks posed by UAVs, or drones if you prefer. Several international airports have had to shut down or cancel hundreds of flights due to drone sightings nearby. Last December's shutdown of Gatwick Airport in the UK is the latest example of that. Here's CGTN's Alexander Majala now with a story of a teenage prodigy who's exploring the cybersecurity risks posed by UAVs and the Internet of Things.
13-year-old Ruben Paul successfully hacked a drone in a stunt aimed at showing how vulnerable web-connected devices are to attacks. The black belt in Chinese martial art Kung Fu calls himself Cyber Ninja and started hacking at 6 years old. Paul took control of the drone in front of an audience at a global cybersecurity conference in Cape Town, South Africa. He was able to fly the drone, access its camera and its data.
I just hacked the drone and I basically scanned for networks in the area. I scanned for the devices connected to the drone's network. Then I disconnected the drone and the user by sending a DOS package. After that, I connected back to the drone and now I have full control of it. I can fly it, I can video record, I can get all kinds of data back.
The stunt, part of an event hosted by cybersecurity provider Kaspersky Lab, was designed to show the vulnerability of the Internet of Things. The IoT refers to internet-connected machinery and household devices that can collect and exchange data using embedded sensors. The list of things in this category keeps getting longer. And to tackle the problem, the teenager founded a cybersecurity awareness and education organization for young people.
So your smart homes, your smart devices, your smart toys, all of this is connected. And this is the technology that's going to be going into future devices such as autonomous cars, flying cars, things like this. So if we don't secure it now, then connectivity without controls can become catastrophic.
93% of the attacks that we saw coming into the Internet of Things are really password-related, weak password-related things.
Kaspersky Lab says that the rapid growth of Internet-enabled devices and the need to deliver them to market quickly often leaves security overlooked. Currently, there are 7 billion Internet-connected devices in the world, and the number is expected to rise. Drone sightings caused 3 days of travel chaos at London's Gatwick Airport in December 2018, resulting in the cancellation or diversion of about 1,000 flights at an estimated cost of more than $65 million. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. When we come back, we'll be looking at the differing economic policies from South Africa's Leading political parties, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, the key players, as it were, well ahead of Wednesday's general elections. All that and more is coming your way live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. Sudanese graffiti artists creatively showcase political changes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The political transition in Sudan is now being captured through art. A number of graffiti artists in the country's capital, Khartoum, are working on creating a visual legacy of the protests that led to the ouster of President Omar al-Bashir in April. Let's take a look.
Sudanese artists have adorned the walls of Khartoum with the memories of the protests. It's part of a project to construct a large painted cloth with signatures of protesters to depict the ousting of Omar al-Bashir as it unfolded. 1 million signatures are expected to find their way to the cloth. The cloth will then be hung all over the walls of the city.
This is the documentation of history, names and the revolution of Sudan. If the uprising is not documented, then coming generations will not have a history because they will not know our history. We are documenting the history of previous generations, documenting the history of the martyrs who died, and documenting our history as fine artists.
Organizers hope their adorned cloth will attract global attention.
Finally, we can say that justice has been done for our revolution. Among our very good work is our mural, which will hopefully enter the Guinness World Records, along with the amount of paintings done by the artists, which is very beautiful work.
I believe that the space used by the fine artists in Sudan during the revolution will turn into a tourist attraction that is registered by the Ministry of Tourism, just like the other locations including the Berlin Wall and other places in Europe that have seen conflict. Fine art is a real mark that has translated all phenomena of the revolution in all shapes as well as in all inner emotions of people.
Former Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir was removed by the military on the 11th of April after months of demonstrations against his 30-year rule. Chamrono, CGTN.
Egypt has created a beauty pageant that suits conservative women. Miss Hijab is exclusively dedicated to girls who wear the Islamic headscarf. It aims to give support to these marginalized women, redefining the stereotypes about beauty. Here's Adel Mahri with more.
Growing in a conservative Egyptian family, Janna Yahya has never realized that she could be one of those famous female stars. It wasn't until she got introduced to the 4th edition of Egypt's Miss Hijab that she realized her potential. It's a beauty pageant founded in 2015 for women wearing hijab, the Islamic headscarf and conservative wardrobe.
Globally, beauty has been restricted to swimwear and certain external looks. When the world sees a girl wearing a scarf, they take a stance. Sometimes people attack the concept, but they don't know why we are dressed this way. This competition creates awareness about hijab. It's definitely an addition.
A girl wearing hijab is no different from any other girl. We've seen many young women under pressure for how they've dressed. That has actually encouraged us to make her compete. She's a hardworking, beautiful woman. We took the challenge to prove that hijab doesn't restrict progress.
108 girls have applied for the 2019 Miss Hijab competition, but 23-year-old Janna was destined to stand out. She was crowned with a title that has shaped her aspirations.
I wish to be a television sports presenter. Beside my career, I've always wanted to be an influential person, a role model, not just to girls, but to men as well. I want to help people around me, not just for the show. I've been doing so even before this title.
For decades, how much skin is revealed was part of the global definition of beauty. Despite an aggressive anti-hijab campaign in recent years, modest fashion has been trending. Some organizations expect that industry could exceed $200 billion by 2020. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And coming up in sports, Egypt scoops 16 medals to top the 2019 African Weightlifting Championship in Cairo.
Africa Live. Find your voice.